I'm here because I am a roaring lion crying out, righteousness.
The reality is there will be more earthquakes, more hurricanes, more pandemics. As Neil Ferguson writes in his book, Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe, history can sometimes seem like just one disaster after another. And before this earthquake struck, COVID-19 was the freshest disaster on our minds and the biggest of our lifetime. According to the International Federation of the Red Cross, no earthquake, drought, or hurricane in recorded history has claimed more lives than the COVID-19 pandemic. Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore were all effective in their approach to the coronavirus, in large part because they had learned from past experiences with other infectious diseases like SARS, MERS, and influenza. A catastrophe lays bare the societies and states that it strikes, Ferguson says in his book. It is a moment of truth, of revelation, exposing some as fragile, others as resilient, and others as anti-fragile, able not just to withstand disaster, but to be strengthened by it. So as we ask whether Turkey and Syria did enough to prepare for their next catastrophe, we should also ask, in the wake of COVID, whether we are prepared for our next one.
I want to take you another step further on this, and I appreciate that historical context and the very brilliant way in which Fareed Zakaria has explained the earthquake, and also in the fact that there's been poor construction there, and a lot of people have made a lot of money off buildings that were not prepared for the earthquake, especially after the big one that took place in 1999. He raised a question at the very last, are we prepared for the next catastrophe? And the next one is called the tribulation, and we're seeing signs of the tribulation and rumors of the tribulation with these earthquakes that are going forward. But the question that Fareed Zakaria did not raise in the biblical context, I want to take it one step further. Are we prepared for the tribulation? And we're not. And a lot of people have taken, like people have built these shoddy buildings in Turkey and Syria. As a result of it, some of the people did not have to die because if the building had been built to code, they would have sustained themselves throughout the process of the earthquake. But the question I want to raise with you, are we ready for the next pandemic? Are we ready for the tribulation? And that we can make that segment 2 of this teaching. Let me just go through a couple of things. As you heard him mention so eloquently and historically, that the ancient city of Antioch, where the Bible says they were first called Christians in Antioch in Turkey, and it's now called Antakya. But there was a great earthquake there, killing over 250,000 people when that earthquake took place in ancient days. I also want to point out that both Turkey and Syria are extremely integral to the history of the Bible, the Old Testament, and extremely relevant to the New Testament history, in many ways more so than the small landmass of Israel. Let me tell you what I mean by that. If you remember your readings in the Bible, you remember Secretary Sennacherib, King Benhadad of Assyria and Syria and Assyria, the Assyrians. Actually, you know, when David slew Goliath, Goliath was a member of the Philistine tribe, and they were pretty powerful. But when you go through the Bible systematically, you'll discover that the Assyrians were as powerful, and Israel feared the Assyrians more so than they did the Palestinians, because the Assyrians were a powerful people, and ultimately the Assyrians took down the northern kingdom. And the Assyrians also gave notice to the northern kingdom in its war against us in the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes in the north. He said, the king of Assyria said, you can send to Egypt and get Egyptians to come help y'all fight. Y'all not going to be able to beat us. And I can give y'all 1,000 horses. You won't have men to sit on them. I mean, he's talking that talk. Very interesting. Assyria, probably the most powerful beyond Egypt, but with a more long-standing and clearer and closer historical. Assyria, when you go through the Bible now, you see Assyria or see Syria, know that that was a very powerful. And then in the days of Jesus, after the resurrection of Jesus and the instruction, Paul was on his way to a place called Damascus, which is also in Syria. It was called Assyria, Syria, interchangeably. They're both the same. So Paul was on his way to Damascus because a lot of the Christians had fled from down in Judea and from Samaria to the north country all the way up to Damascus, and Paul was on his way to arrest them. And then, of course, we have Turkey, which, of course, is the city of Antioch, and many of the, if you will, the letters and the epistles that Paul wrote were to cities in Syria and in the region of Turkey where these earthquakes took place. Now, what I want to do is, you may be wondering, say, well, now, nearly 40,000 people have died in these earthquakes. So horrific. People, 4 o'clock in the morning, people are sleeping, and the building comes crumbling down on your bed. We're seeing children being pulled out of the rubble after being in that situation for more than a week. Miracle rescues. But you may ask the question, why is it that God has let this happen to Syria and Turkey? They're not really important. I mean, if it was happening in maybe Russia or America and China, these evil nations, that perhaps it would be somehow or another justified. But why is God letting this happen? And I can tell you that you have to remember that Assyria has been an evil player in the Bible for centuries. More so than America. America's only a 240-year-old nation, 400 years to some degree. But Assyria has been around for a long time, raising you know what, for a very long time. Assyria, if you know your history, both biblical history and secular history, Assyria has been a bad player for a very long time. Assyria. And then, of course, and so, there's an event there in the book of 1 Samuel rather, where Samuel says to Saul to kill the King Agag of the Amorites. And God says, I want you to kill him, because several hundred years earlier, when Moses and the children of Israel were out in the wilderness in their 40-year stretch, they came upon the city of the kingdom of the Amorites, and the king of the Amorites wouldn't let them walk, wouldn't give them water, wouldn't give them food, wouldn't give them anything. And this is like 700 years later, God remembers that, and he sends Saul to kill Agag for what he did to Moses and the children of Israel. This is years later God gets his vengeance. This is hundreds of years later. But the thing of it is that Saul didn't do it. Saul killed some of the men, but he kept some of the sheep, and he let King Agag laugh. So Samuel shows up, and Agag is there, and Samuel says, what's this bleating of sheep? What's out here? This? And Saul runs a Murphy and says, well, we thought we'd keep the best sheep for offering, and we let King Agag live. And Samuel, the great prophet, said, give me your sword. And he takes his sword and whacks King Agag's neck off. And then he says to Saul, he says, and then Saul tries to grab him as he walks away, and he rips his robe. And Samuel says to Saul, your kingdom has been ripped away from you because you refused to kill King Agag. So God gets vengeance years later. I expect God is just working his way up the chronological scale by having these earthquakes take place in Syria and Turkey. And by the way, some of you may remember the Ottoman Empire. It doesn't get talked about much as if you will, the ancient empires of Egypt or Rome, the Roman Empire or the British Empire. The Ottoman Empire, which consisted mainly of a lot of Muslims and others, spanned a period of over 600 years, starting in somewhere around the 13th century, the Ottoman Empire, and they became a mighty nation covering most of what had been the area of the church, including Turkey was its foundation, and for 600 years. And then at the close of the Ottoman Empire, back in the 20th century, the Ottomans killed over 1 million Armenians on the border of Syria and Turkey. 1 million Armenians have been running from the Ottomans and their power and the pashas of the Ottoman, the pashas, their power, their religion, and they were in many ways more powerful than Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, the Ottoman Empire. But I don't know, for whatever reason, historians don't go down the road of teaching about the Ottoman Empire. But for 600 years, they ruled, longer than, I would think, than the Egyptian rule. At any rate, they ended their reign was ended when they killed over 1 million Armenians right there on the border of Syria and Turkey. And their empire ended with World War I rather, was really the end of the Ottoman Empire. They were decimated by the fact of the World War II. It could come to Europe. But the Ottomans controlled Europe for over 600 years. So why is that important? It's important because if you want to try to ask the question, why is God letting this happen to these poor-looking people? You know, you'd have to know the history. And God's working his way up. America is the last one to come up on the stage. And America will probably be the last place where earthquakes are coming. But they're coming. You know, all these other empires and nations and whatnot been out there for years, pre-Old Testament, pre-New Testament. I mean, they've been out there for years doing their due. America just got started with his evil. But trust me, America will not escape. And I think that the other thing that people ought to be aware of is that when it does come to America, there will be no screams. There'll be no pain that has ever been felt that will be able to express the pain of what God's going to do in America. But I'll say this to you. Now, listen, I'm going to say this. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to pay any attention to this. You listen to me. You come to me, listen to me every day. That's good. That's cool. You don't have to believe anything I say. But I can tell you this. It will not come nigh ATLAH. It will not come nigh ATLAH. No, the ATLAH people, the earthquakes and all the other offers will not come nigh ATLAH. And if it comes to New York City, we will be miraculously saved by the hand of God. And God will preserve ATLAH for a place for him to return to when he comes back. I thought I would give that addendum to what is being publicly known now in the news, and you'll do with it whatever you so choose. But I will remain the teacher and the servant of the Lord. I'm James David Manning. I'll be right back.